Hey guys, it is Floaties once again. If you watched the previous video, which is here if you haven't yet, we just beat Yaldabaoth, the original final boss of Persona 5. And it is time to move on to the true ending of the Royal. Unlike my speedrun attempt, I'll focus less on gameplay and more on the story, along with its design choices. I'll be frank with you, this is one of my favorite stories in the whole gaming, not just SMT. Just as always, my interpretations could differ from yours, or the original design's attempts, and I call that simply good storytelling. There's a lot to unpack, so let's get on to the video. And spoilers for everything once again. If you haven't played that section yet, please do, it is really good. First things first, what exactly happens with the defeat of Yaldabaoth? Royal's expansion on the story gives us additional info on the change of heart, with some references to the past games, and that alone makes me excited to talk about the game. Losing the treasure of its palace, Mementos disappears, and Morgana's metaverse form along with it. That cutscene stays unchanged from the original, as Morgana basically explains Sea of Souls once again. Sea of Souls is the name for the collective unconsciousness in the Persona universe. As Carl Jung explained it, any form of idea, emotion, or event to hold sway in humanity's memory can find multiple, different shapes here. Usually this world and the real world act independently from each other, but don't assume them to be disconnected. As Persona 3 explained it, Nyx arrived in this world as an alien form and caused humanity to evolve as highly social creatures capable of connecting. That subconscious dependency almost causes humanity to exist in two different planes, subtly but surely affecting each other. Both worlds are part of humanity. If you don't like that explanation, you can also ignore it, as Persona games also work perfectly fine as standalone entries. Every form to exist in the other plane comes directly from humanity's desires or will. As such, multiple facets of that world constantly leaks into the real world. Tartarus from Persona 3, TV world from Persona 4, and Metaverse from Persona 5 are just examples of it. Those breaches usually happen because of humanity's fear and love for knowledge, for understanding. Humans fail to make sense of a trait shared by each of them and place their beliefs in faith and moral guidance to make sense of it. Any correspondence with the Sea of Souls births an answer for humanity, taking shape from the archetypes or common stories we've told since the very beginning. Yaldabaoth and his metaverse was an answer for uncertainty towards injustice, the wish for security. As we examine the Royal storyline and any of the previous games, we must highlight how most of the workings of the metaverse were just a distorted system under Yaldabaoth's control. If we are to divide the facets as Persona and Shadow, which both serve as a representation of desires, Shadows similarly account for the masses, as they lack the personality of an awakened persona. We can see more examples of this in the palace rulers' transformed forms. Their shadow forms took on the attributes of the 7 deadly sins, another common system that can easily be attributed to the most of humanity. Since Metaverse was created by Yaldabaoth, that distortions also changed the shadow's workings. Yaldabaoth imprisoned anyone with a wish to save themselves from the burden of deciding, then sow even more chaos and instability in the public by using Joker and Akechi to entrance more of the masses. Palaces were also his intervention. He specifically imprisoned those with the will to follow up on their distorted desires in palaces, to strengthen their impact in the real world. Rather than getting rid of their distorted desires with change of hearts, Yaldabaoth just returned them to his prison in Mementos, turning them into apathetic versions of themselves to cause more discord through the thieves' actions. That part is important, as we are about to learn more about the change of heart. That is the constant journey of humanity. Desire for answers can never be quelled, and any form of answer in the Sea of Souls receives those pleas collectively. Morgana states that each world is a cognition of an individual, but the wish for a clear-cut answer overrides the boundaries of our cognitions. Our need for a decisive answer causes us to turn down our answers, and whatever we find on the other side must answer the whole of humanity. As such, it is almost impossible to find an undistorted vision, or justice as the game calls it, from a single source. But would a human do a better job of it? Would a human, uncreated and unguided by the wishes of the masses, make sense of the whole of our collective unconsciousness? Following the events there, Mementos disappears, and public opinion towards the thieves is no longer swayed by the god of control. Remember, the entire Mementos was a creation of Yaldabaoth. It was a shelter to observe and chastise humanity as required. In the new story, the game keeps on making constant parallels to that, which is amazing. I don't mind a completely new story as long as it builds upon the themes or characters of the game, but Royal goes well beyond that. Just as we prepare for the New Year celebrations, Saya asks Joker to turn himself in, to hold Shido and his accomplices accountable, and reveal the conspiracies in the government, identical to the original game. Suddenly, Akechi appears and takes our place as the number one culprit. We don't have enough time to question how he is alive there and return to our daily life. Some small fortunate events keep happening around us as we get closer to the big reveal. I mean, the antagonistic figure isn't hidden, but those kinds of twists exist more for the characters in the story anyway. For now, let's focus on the word suddenly. I'll mention it a lot during the third semester. We kick things off with a dreamy school section in our signature prison outfit. A sea of souls exists between dream and reality, mind and matter. Joker is invited there by opposing forces, the Neve prison keeper and a familiar blue butterfly. Strangely, even though the game lacked the usual school aspect of the previous games, we can still see the changes we caused around the school for the whole year. People's opinions of many of our teammates changed drastically. We befriended and helped our class teacher, protected the students from a mafia ring, and much more. All in all, maybe we didn't exactly carve a place for ourselves, but we did cause a change in that place. Now seeing the school as a prison of all the spaces held us within makes that scene jarring. On New Year's Day, we wake one morning to find Morgana as a human, Futaba's deceased mother alive, and Kasumi reminds us of a promise to meet at the shrine, one which never happened. Similarly, all of our party members show up at the shrine with strange happenings of their own. Ryuji mentions his ongoing track career and is meeting with Shiho as if she never moved, and Haru's father is suddenly alive and caring. Everyone but Joker acts oblivious to these impossible events. The game handles Joker a bit naively there, as he takes his sweet time until confronting the others. Meanwhile, Akechi makes the first move against these strange happenings, mentioning how they let him go after an interrogation, even though he admitted to all of his crimes. If you watched the first part of that video, and if you haven't, here it is once again, you might remember that strange palace. The Laboratory of Sorrow is the biggest palace in the game and will act as our last hurdle. Kasumi also finds herself headed there with a strange sense of disillusionment. That palace is different from all the others, as it could be seen in the real world, but similar to the clip-out world in the original game, no one seems to take notice of it. Additionally, you still need to jump to the metaverse to gain access to it. As you know, you need a name, the place of distortion, and how the ruler of the palace envisions that place to enter there. But back in last semester, Kasumi accidentally activated that search. So even though we still don't know the ruler, we can check that place out thanks to the browser history. The ruler even goes out of their way to hide their name somehow. More on that later. Our royal trio checks the dungeon out, and before anything else, we see the drastic difference between the last dungeon and that one. Depths and Clipot World was covered in red and black, otherworldly veins covering the entire premise, hanging chains and jails going deeper and deeper in a spiral. But if you remember, most of the bosses were angels, and quite high level ones at that. The last boss rush made use of the Divine Heralds, Michael and his cohort. Well, this time, instead of taking the quite lengthy road inwards of Mementos, we are using a huge elevator to access the dungeon. Instead of reaching deeper, we are climbing higher. Rather than an otherworldly, inhumane place, we have a psychological facility that works as it really should. Tons of cognitive humans getting treated in a white hospital, decorated with flowers and ornaments. By all means, that place looks peaceful, maybe too peaceful. As earthly as that place is, the cracks show themselves in the shadows. Most of the enemies symbolize abstract concepts or human fears. Macabre, the Death Manifest, or Loa, the Cursed Messenger, crawls the floors as slimy, tentacled creatures. Speaking of their designs, rather than enemies with a history that can be traced to centuries ago, most of the shadows here actually come from Lovecraftian mythology, considerably closer to our timeline, and as some call it, man-made creations, free of the religious dogma of the heavenly host. This opposition slowly builds towards the reveal of the treatment, or cause of the distortion. Most of the story points in the dungeon are conveyed with screens, whether in huge stadium-spanning conference halls or those nostalgic CTR TVs with tape. Again, unlike the chatty religious figures in the depths or the first-hand source from the trapped humans. Speaking of humans, here most cognitions lack the means to explain themselves, even when compared to the fearful, trapped masses back there, and Kasumi gained access to that place exactly because of that. Kasumi did have a sister, but unlike she claims, she had an older sister who was named Kasumi. They both were promising gymnasts, but the one named Kasumi always performed a little better. That drives the younger sister, Sumire, into self-hating adolescence, and she lashes at her sister. That scene culminates in an accident where Kasumi saves her careless sister from a car crash. Witnessing the truth causes Kasumi's, or as her real name Sumire's, breakdown. The voice that wanted to keep Joker in school, the voice that tried to turn Sumire back before she learns the truth, reveals himself to be Dr. Maruki, the part-time psychiatrist at Shujin Academy. By that point, we knew he was working on cognitive science, especially the treatment of trauma by changing one's cognition, and knew Kasumi was a patient of his for some time. So, as I said, the reveal is more important in the scene rather than the twist you may want. That is both a triumphant moment for Sumire's characterization and serves as a gripping story device. Here is why. Maruki had this palace for quite a while. Just we were in the dark. And Maruki there is no shadow. He is the real Maruki we spent the year with ruling his own palace. Sumire couldn't handle the guilt of being the cause of her sister's death, and Maruki couldn't ignore her plights. So he changed her cognition to be her older sister instead. Successful and kind, energetic and bold Kasumi. At that point, Maruki reveals it wasn't a perfect change, of course. Nothing like the changes he caused in the real world. Only Sumire taught herself to be the older sister, and she only heard the name she wished to be called with. Although Maruki admits he didn't cause that change consciously, he still took advantage of the situation to experiment on a patient, out of kindness, as he calls it. Sumire still felt the pain of losing her sister and failed to perform at her best. She still found the palace, the cause of her distorted personality, to face her trauma. She awakened to Cendrillon as she accepted the death of a sister. Unlike most of the population under Maruki's control, who lives their lives in bliss, Sumire questioned the coincidences, beginning with their shrine visit and her father's behavior towards her, which made her remember the accident. She gave our party the chance to oppose Maruki and learn the truth, but still failed to accept it. Sumire accepts Maruki's treatment once again to become Kasumi, and Maruki gives Joker the chance to explore the outside world before revealing anything else. I've been deliberately using the words accident and coincidence for a while, as the game puts great emphasis on those. Sumire coincidentally caused Maruki to explore his newfound power and brought the forces to oppose that power together. So, which part of it was an accident and which part of it was a coincidence? It is in human nature to accept accidents, the misfortune, as it leaves you with two choices. You are to either rise above it or wallow in sorrow for your chances. But neither of those two choices lets you disregard the question of what if. Even if it is caused completely by chance, there will be that inner voice that makes you think the accident is preventable. We etch that fortune into our mentality and carry it as the trauma. As evidenced in Maruki's new world, coincidences are to be celebrated and cherished. There is no reason to take any of the events into account as we are eager to believe in that happenstance. But again, we are shown Sumire to be skeptical of good fortune. Some of the voices in the city mention the impossibility of such odds, and rather than accepting their chances, some of the struggling populace become wary of it. They grow afraid of too much of a good thing. Now, obviously, my definitions for both of those stem from highly exaggerated events. Even still, it is in human nature to be confounded about themselves and their fortunes. Accidents are to be expected, to be thought upon, and to be progressed beyond. Too much good fortune, on the other hand, seems to be unnatural, almost fruitless. There is not much to be contemplated upon coincidences, especially for people who struggle with their mentality or even people in their everyday lives who struggle to accept the new reality. Just like Yaldabaoth's ignorance, coincidences without consequences take away the need to question or remove the burden of responsibility, and that happiness grows stale, stagnant, and inhumane. Gameplay wise, the following week is kinda lackluster. You are to meet with one of your teammates each day, and the whole day ends after a small conversation. Those are to represent the ideal worlds imagined by the Phantom Thieves. Anne and Shiho never face the abuse of Kamoshida and live their ideal high school life together. Ryuji never gets injured and keeps up with the track team to support his mom. Yusuke imagines Madarame to be a caring teacher figure, guiding him at every step. Makoto wishes to be closer as a family, lamenting the burden of her sister that changed her. Futaba and Haru wish to be with their deceased parents, supporting their choices wholeheartedly. Joker tries to wake them up from the dream world, but never forces the choice upon them. He is willing to let them live happier lives if the truth is too much for them to handle. The best part of that scenes would be how direct and expected ideal definitions those are. Most of those are wishes to live their age as it should be, compared to the burdens they had to shoulder. Since some part of it directly comes from Maruki's ideas of happiness, we can see how he got rid of any moment of opposition and failed to take note of the thief's aspirations or wishes for the future. Maruki creates the ideal, singular moment as it should be, while ignoring the past and crippling the future. Next week, as per Maruki's deadline, we return to the stadium with Akechi, confronting Maruki once more. Akechi, being Akechi, makes sure of our determination, after seeing how happy our friends are. Here you can accept Maruki's reality for an alternate ending, but I won't be talking about it. Once rejected, Sumire agitates and refuses to go back to being Sumire, who caused her sister's death, and there is a lot to talk about that boss fight. Maruki actually learns the definition of a palace from us, and lacks the understanding of the metaverse considerably, but he still possesses the power to change reality altogether. When compared to the Yaldabaoth, a god born as a concept with complete power over the Sea of Souls, Maruki's machinations almost remind a child, trying to understand the moving part of the consciousness. While Yaldabaoth had complete control and understanding, he refused to interact with mementos in any form. Rather, he imprisoned all the desires and control mechanisms there, being the ignorant god he is. On the contrary, we see Maruki's persona for the first time there, and although it won't be named for a while, I thought that is a good enough section to begin talking about it. Like his palace, Maruki's persona is a Lovecraftian creation. Azathoth, the blind and idiot god. Although some tellings of it differ here and there, Azathoth is thought as the creator of many other beings of its mythos, including Cthulhu and the King in Yellow. Azathoth is said to reside at the center of the universe, and created the sprawling systems around it by just being there. It is a cosmic force that acts subconsciously, hence the blind and idiot god namesake he received. Another iteration likens his creation act to a dream. The whole creation is just a part of its dream, and once he awoke, we are to be erased on a whim. That definition matches Maruki's powers directly. He had no control over his powers, and like a dream, he messed with the cognition of Sumire, allowing herself to see herself as Kasumi. Although that didn't change the whole reality, he still managed to make her hear Sumire as Kasumi, creating a perfect bubble for her to play with her new personality. Maruki calls that power actualization, a very idealistic word choice, making things as they should be. Free of pain is his definition of the said power. That moniker could have been used to reference Maslow's needs charts, as self-actualization, the need to complete yourself as desired, is the highest point of a life form with consciousness. Similarly, Azathoth is defined as a sleeping god in the game as well, managing to use his influence in the real world without ever accessing the metaverse. This otherworldliness is used to paint Maruki's ideals in a foreign light. Although by all means Maruki is completely human, what he gained and pursued seemed to stray away far from that. Another similarity might exist between Futaba and her, as both avid researchers of the cognitive world, their personas manifested as Lovecraftian mythos. Trying to understand the human mind can be seen as alienating to some, and their representation of unimaginable beings might be used to depict the hurdle it possesses. Another comment from an official interview also correlates Lovecraftian mythos' man-made nature to the artificial world and happiness Maruki created. Back to the battle at hand, Joker quickly overwhelms Sumire, but Maruki offers her another choice to actualize her dream. Azathoth appears as tentacles, again quite similar to Futaba's Necronomicon, and forcefully removes Sumire's persona. Maruki causes Cendrillon to go berserk. Unlike Akechi's psychotic powers gifted from Yaldabaoth, Maruki seems to have direct power over desires and can even use personas themselves to reflect those at all costs. As he calls it, the human mind is weak and shouldn't be expected to triumph over traumas, but subconscious wishes can be drawn out to create a safer outcome. By his demonstration, we can surmise he originally had the power to directly influence one's subconscious, even when one lacks a persona. On another note, we haven't seen Berserk personas since the third game. There they represented a lack of complete control over one's identity, lashing out to exist. Yet again, here Berserk Cendrillon serves a similar purpose. At the very last moment, the rest of the Phantom Thieves show up and manages to remember their past and bonds. Albeit damaged and challenging, they accept those as who they are. Not only for themselves, but for the friends they met, influenced, or ventured together. Sumire passes out after her defeat, and that gives us a glimpse of Maruki's temperament. By continuously forcing Sumire to live in another reality, he made her incapable of living the pain of losing her sister, advancing their shared dreams, supporting herself and her family in their time of need, and much more. Maruki's flaunt talk fails to grasp the thief's actions, and he gives us another deadline to finish his dungeon, the 3rd of February, or as the game calls it, the Day of Fates. With the gang back together, Joker once again gains access to the Velvet Room, and I must mention two very important voice actors before moving on. With great sadness, Igor's Japanese voice actor Isamu Tanonaka passed away on the 13th of January 2010, and in respect, they didn't record any new lines for Igor during that time. May he and Maruki's English voice actor Billy Kametz, who passed in 2022 due to cancer, rest in peace. Regaining our rebellious spirit, we are freed from the prison uniform a second time, and that seemed a bit on the nose for me the first time around. However, contemplating the idea of imprisonment here does serve as the game's strength. The vanilla story of Persona 5 could be considered quite larger than life. There, the imprisonment storyline begins as a literal representation of our wrongful impeachment and the forced relocation from our hometown. But it grows into being present in society, failing to stand up for yourself. The royal route works on a similar scale, using Maruki as a whole reality warping source, but the imprisonment idea here is quite personal. Joker and the rest of our thieves get cut out from the friendships they built, the accomplishments they achieved, the lessons they've learned, and the hardships they've endured. Losing all of that in Maruki's reality is what imprisons them in that loneliness. The first thing our friends mentioned after regaining their identities was how they forgot the time they've spent together. Lavenza and the team meet in the real world to brainstorm on the ongoing events. Now, that is the main explanation behind many points we've talked about until there. As we beat Yaldabaoth in the world that was fused with mementos, Maruki managed to fully awaken to his persona, as the whole city became one with the metaverse. Again, Maruki not only managed to use his powers in the real world, but he also made use of them as a sleeping persona without fully awakening. That correlates with the sleeping old god, the definition of Azathoth, as he had no control or purpose in their creations. Additionally, we know Maruki already had a palace because of his distorted desires towards salvation, so he managed to exist in the metaverse with his palace on the same day, and awakened his persona at that time. Those are all important story points, but the actual events that led there begin with Phantom Thieves as revealed by Lavenza. Maruki's investigations into the cognitive world were cut down by someone, and the stadium replaced its supposed research center, as we've learned in its social link. After meeting with the Phantom Thieves and during their counseling, not only Joker and many others gave details into the cognitive world, but they also revealed their deepest wishes to Maruki. During the time of Yaldabaoth's defeat, the whole city was praying to Phantom Thieves for salvation. But the game asks the question of what were the thieves wishing for, as Yaldabaoth was the Holy Grail, a treasure that represents humanity's wishes, administrating the subconscious. That momentary lack of control gave Maruki the chance to take over mementos. Deep down, thieves already admitted their wishes to Maruki, masquerading as a therapy session, so Maruki just gave that back to our thieves. Even though that changed reality wasn't entirely how they envisioned their ideal reality, just the prospect of a better life existed in their wishes, just like any other person. The cognition of salvation correlated in thieves, and subsequently Maruki used that cognition of the masses to actualize thieves' wishes in a new reality, which gave him control of mementos, as all thieves were thinking of Maruki as a caring and supportive figure in their lives, who did help them with their hardships. Consequently, humans created their savior in a completely humanoid figure, Maruki Takuto. All of these revelations are eavesdropped on by Sumire, who wants to make up for the situation she put us in, along with her desire to help Maruki. Even misguided, he still gave her a chance to find herself and remember the bond between her and her sister. This all culminates in a second awakening in the palace, and that is a spectacular retelling with tons of implications. We know Maruki's actualization only changed Sumire's cognition rather than turning her into Kasumi, but she managed to awaken to her persona in that alter ego. Cendrillon still shared her misguided vision, but understood her desires and answered accordingly. In Sumire's mind, all of that was still attributed to Kasumi and her perfect vision of her. But once Sumire took her mask, she found Cendrillon again, with a vision of her dead sister. That could show how similar their ambitions and personalities were, even though Sumire refused to admit it. Or the lifelong wish of Kasumi's protectiveness towards Sumire could have found a voice, a resonance in the Sea of Souls to return to Sumire as Cendrillon. Of course, that could just be another wish of Sumire to find strength from her sister to regain their reality. But Sumire still vows Cendrillon to be a culmination of their wishes to stand atop the world together. Similarly, on the following days, we are given a chance to meet with our teammates, whose social links we've completed for a chance to awaken their third-tier personas, akin to previous games. Although they lack voiceovers, they complement Royal's story greatly. Thieves generally speak about the desires they've told to Maruki and apologize to our protagonist for letting him down, accepting the ideal reality and forgetting about their friendship. The second-tier personas were born from their desire to rise above their circumstances, and find a place to belong and protect. The feeling of competence and justice guided much of their actions. As such, their personas turned into mythological tricksters, godlike figures to represent the responsibility. But with the ultimate personas, our thieves come back full circle. The third tier personas are all created from the fusing of the previous two, the ideal and the real, the vision and the self. Not only that, but also they take on the original names of the figures they awakened into. Zoro, an ideal figure of a vigilante, remembers the name Diego. The legendary pirate Captain Kidd receives his first name William. The play of Carmen rose to fame thanks to being portrayed by Celestine vividly. Japanese outlaw Goemon's real name was only found in the records after his death as Gorokichi. Papa John might be the common name to call Johanna, but some sources imply her real name to be Agnes. Necronomicon might be the name of the grimoire, but in a few Lovecraftian stories, it is said to first appear with the name Al-Azif, written by an Arab in the 8th century, Abdul al-Hazret. Milady may have risen from the novel The Three Musketeers, but the inspiration behind that character is thought to be Lucy Hay, Countess of Carlisle in the 1600s. As such, the Phantoms regain their first personas, accepting their vision of justice and finding peace within themselves, almost akin to a certain major arcana called the World, since they only want to stand by their choices in the face of Maruki, rather than reforming or punishing a criminal. These personas not only feel much more personal, but they could also very well be that way. Most of our subconscious, be it our ideas or stories, are shared between humans, and in those stories, we tend to turn to the big names to exemplify our various actions. As for the original names mentioned above, they are both mentioned and cherished much less often. They are given as examples much less often. This easily represents the thieves' acceptance towards not only themselves, but the world around them and their newfound intent to rise above it themselves, as the choice of remembering came with its consequences, and they realized the beauty in that. Persona 5 is a game heavily influenced by Kabbalah's teachings, and that is even more apparent in the Royal. The team's exploration of Maruki's palace cuts short by a series of tentacles, creeping from mementos, and we have to leave another day to pass through Memento's new layer. Before moving on to that part, let's take a look at Kabbalah in general. Although Kabbalah is a name for a certain field of study regarding Jewish mysticism, one must think of Judaism in itself, and those interpretations as different studies that may vary from one another. Jewish mysticism also contains different ideas, such as Hasidism, and Kabbalah itself is evolved and separated into many of branches. Kabbalah means received tradition in Hebrew, as that word was already in use by older Judaic texts. The first iteration of Kabbalah took that term as a continuation of their findings to reveal the hidden traditions of Tohar, their holy book. Later on, the main principles of Kabbalah would turn into a principle of text called Zohar. After that obligatory introduction, let's take a look at the idea of enlightenment. Ein Sof, a depiction of infinity, is the God before creation, nameless above everything and formless. Ein Sof, the eternal divinity of everything, would shine his light and give birth to creation with the tree of life and its Sephiroth. The tree of life is a descending tree sprouting from the divine world of light and radiates the light of Ein Sof in 10 different Sephiroth or attributes. These are all still Ein Sof, and he creates the physical reality by channeling the higher realms of his residence. These 10 lights also contributed to the soul of humanity, and each defines a different state of being, all leading back up to God himself. Although you can see 11 Sephiroth there, Keter and Da'at are interchangeable, as Keter means crown, the highest plane of residence, the unknowable divine meaning in where God resides. Basically, unreachable knowledge, while Da'at represents the concept of knowledge, where humans can reach with their will. Beginning from the heart of spiritual fulfillment and self-actualization, in the concept of knowledge, the tree gives way to the primary and secondary emotions, representing the growth of a human. Chokma, or wisdom, and Bina, or understanding, create the conscious intellect and will to learn and improve. Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet correspondingly mean kindness, discipline, and glory, which form the higher emotions, creating one's faith. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod translate to victory, splendor, and foundation, or the secondary emotions that form one's pleasure. Finally, Malkut as the lowest plane represents the material world, the world of action, kingdom. As humans, we tend to glorify the hero's journey, a concept we gave rise to with our first stories. The human in question begins as a sapling, triumphs over their downfalls, and gets to be the true hero, the desirable outcome. Although the tragic hero definition corresponds to a much more materialistic journey throughout the years, many concepts depicting that journey were invented again and again. For example, Fool's Journey, which acts as the cornerstone of the Persona series, depicts a man who hasn't taken his first step in the life, in being himself. Meanwhile, the last major arcana, the World, is a man assured of his place in the world, with an adulterated joy. Similarly, Kabbalah follows the path of the flaming sword, a way to enlighten the human spirit through each of the 10 Sephiroth, culminating in the Da'at, the divine conscious knowledge. The new layer of mementos is aptly called Path of Da'at, but that road rises from the depths of mementos, the place where we fought with the Holy Grail. Da'at begins as a path of rising steps and twists upon the original mementos, reaching a control room at the end. The path of the enlightened just results in a process to understand the human mind and consciously lacks the rest of the Sephiroth. While mementos was a metaphor for Qliphoth, the tree of evil in Kabbalah, which represented all the vices in the human soul, it still contained all of our distorted desires. It was just Yaldabaoth who saw their existence as a blemish that leads to ruin at the end. Tree of Life's topmost part in Kabbalah connects directly to the lower planes, and then inverts to the Tree of Vices. Knowledge and vice virtually connects. As such, there is no reason to contemplate the neutral point as a basis. Vices are just inverted forms of divine revelations. Man can't reach enlightenment without conquering their vices and seeing the beauty in their counterparts. Maruki's mementos not only paint over to rise above those vices, treating them as non-existent, but it also lacks any of the Sephiroth in the Tree of Life. Maruki's idea of enlightenment or happiness might be an endpoint, but neither the vices of Qliphoth nor the emanations of Sephiroth are removed from the highest point of the tree. Kabbalah specifically says that each point of Sephiroth contains the same light, however removed from the crown it is. Lastly, another interesting point is the writing of Da'at. The names of the paths in mementos were taken from Qliphoth in Hebrew, but all of these names were distorted, similar enough in pronunciation, but not the same. I always thought that it represented Yaldabaoth's ignorance of the true nature of vices. He, as the god he is, set those to exist in human nature and granted humanity punishment accordingly. Maruki's layer of mementos is that, as it is written, he probably believes his path of enlightenment to be the true one. Similarly, Azathoth's existence as a blind and idiot god causes them to see the enlightenment as a single step of creation, disregarding any of the connections that lead to it. In the previous parts, I've talked about the terms accident and coincidence greatly. Removing the creeping tentacles from mementos opens up the second part of the dungeon and expands upon those terms. There, the party finds a few locked doors, only to be opened with specific words. Those words then found in a few videotapes about Maruki's past. All the other shadow selves flaunted their deeds and cognitions, openly reflecting their desires, but Maruki's self-righteous ideals override most of his palace. Even though the palace was created before his awakening, we must assume him to have some control over his palace. Yet, in that path, parts of his psyche that he tried to repress still seep through the cracks. However impressive his actualization may be, he still fails to believe in his happiness to control it. Rumi, his longtime girlfriend's parents, got murdered in front of her eyes in a burglary gone wrong, and Rumi became apathetic and reclusive, facing her trauma. Maruki used his actualization powers for the first time there, rearranging her memories completely. Even though that caused Rumi to forget about him, he decided that happiness is the better end for her. Like Sumire's case, he got rid of all the accomplishments, memories, and history to let her live in bliss. Coincidental happiness overrode another accident, which became Maruki's ideology. All of his ideas of happiness and safety come back to causality. In short words, the causality I decided to use here relates to consequences. Every action has its consequence, however small or big it might be. That is the inescapable part of an accident, and what almost completely lacks in a coincidence. The latter relates to the ending of an action, and almost chooses for us reverting to a path with crystal clear view. Maruki always held on to that belief in good fortune, especially during his chance encounters with the thieves, which resulted in his ascension to what he is now. That line of thinking, exaggerated to great portions, is shown again in the questionnaire part of the dungeon. Maruki used mementos to gather data about the dreams and thoughts of humanity, and in his cognition worked to create a system to evaluate those. As we pass through the dungeon answering questions, Maruki's system acts desperately to find the safest way and attributes the cognitive subject's ideals right or wrong. Safety is a form to combat the consequences after all. If you could always choose the least painful way, humanity could attain happiness. If you fail to make that decision, Maruki's system can make one for you, getting rid of what holds you back to lead you to a new life. Even though he assures to think the best for humanity, in the end his artificial happiness resolves in an override to your personality. Maruki just finds solace in the authenticity of his studies. The last section of the dungeon showcases that clearly, as the cognitive patients he treated rise above to the heavens safely in a cradle, protected from their thoughts. He aptly called the place the Twilight Corridor, one last ascension before the real paradise. Maruki's deadline for his palace falls on the same date as Rumi's birthday, his atonement in the form of a ode to her happiness. One last escapade from consequences as he completely removes himself from her new life, calling that the highest beauty to come from happiness, decorating the last steps with countless statues of her. The promised date arrives and Maruki shows up in LeBlanc, knowing we have to give a calling card to him. But just before that, he plays the last card in his sleeve. Maruki proposes a hostage situation with Akechi, as he returned him from death because of Joker and Akechi's mutual wish to have another chance at life between them. You can choose to give in to his perfect world there, or reach for the true ending. Our refusal only confounds Maruki more as he grew closer and closer with us that past year, and was sure to give us only the very best. Without a doubt, he genuinely wanted to create a better life for us, and he was failing to see the reasoning behind our decision. Maruki stays steadfast in his ideals and declares his clear intention to fight tomorrow. What leads Joker to his decision can be described as Adam's labor. Akechi listens to our conversation and admits that Joker truly understands him. He had to hide behind his ideals to exist and was goaded by powerful figures at every turn, but that's exactly how he gained his power, skills, and knowledge, again, quite similar to the Tree of Life. If he were to accept Maruki right now, it would just be giving in to another figure to not only have control over his life, but also the lives of Joker and the rest of the world, being reduced to nothing more than a hostage at the very end, even when he decided to pave a way for Joker and others to escape back in Shadow's ship. He was determined back then, and he still is. Adam is cursed to work his way back to heaven, but wasn't that exactly what gave him the chance to grow apart from God's shadow? Wasn't it being able to build, cherish, and pass on to the morrows to come that led him to many new names and loves, rather than what God had decreed upon them? Humanity's labor is endless, and quite frankly could be meaningless in the vacuum of a moment, but it is shared by the whole of humanity still. Each day, our prospects grow bigger and taller. Now, why did I mention Adam and his banishment there? Because the final confrontation takes place in a muddled Eden, a depiction of the biblical paradise in a construct, Maruki's vision of an altered reality. Like a planet, that model builds its core in the center with a spiraling staircase, and just like the Holy Garden, a tree greets our thieves at the entrance. Although its depiction is somewhat different, there the tree paves the way to the solace of Maruki. That tree is cherished and flaunted by the cognitions around it and grows half-eaten apples, many of them. Even though most of Maruki's palace was connected to mementos, which runs his idea of enlightenment, that tree is not the tree of life or the tree of vices. It appears to be the biblical tree of knowledge, or the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The tree is a common source in all of the Abrahamic religions and is depicted as the reason for Adam and Eve's banishment. Some of the interpretations vary greatly though. Given life by God and receiving the will to think is seen as a gift to reach enlightenment by some Judaism texts, or the source of evil to be unleashed upon the world. Here, it is a motif of Maruki's gift to humanity, letting everyone taste the ultimate knowledge, letting them ascend to his heaven. Just like his lair in Mementos, the tree matters more than the path around it. Knowledge is freely given and standardized as countless floating figures around it carry the same figure. Here, Maruki truly believes all the coincidences that led there as an ultimate answer, and take the role of a religious shepherd for a new age of humanity, as can be seen from his mask. Maruki and his sleeping god carry themselves in a symbiotic relationship. Unlike almost all the other personas we've seen, Azathoth appears behind him and stays there until defeated. Azathoth grows 3 different tentacles to protect them both, and in the second phase, their resistances change randomly with each regeneration. As expected from the perpetrator of a random creation on the cosmic scale, most of their attacks carry nuclear or light properties, and I believe consciously leave out psychological ones. From the perspective of Maruki and Azathoth, their actions and their actualization are no different than creation itself. During the fight, Maruki will try to convince the thieves of his world and cuts their access to magic, items and such. Like a certain serpent, all of his nice wishes come hand in hand with an act to dispose thieves of something they took for granted. As Maruki begins his final fight, he thanks and assures Azathoth that he is their final obstacle. At that point, he still holds on to his ego. Maruki fails against the thieves and causes his treasure to reveal itself, a torch to guide humanity forward. All of these design choices obviously depict Maruki's god complex, but here game drives it ever forward, letting his conscience to be consumed by his impulses. He calls his torch, his treasure back to himself, taking the gift of guidance away from the thieves he so hardly tried to create better lives for, and fuse it with his persona. As we've seen in that semester, personas either evolve by themselves or combine the attributes of two similar facades, but Maruki decides to overwhelm his personality with his desires to force a change. Weakened Azathoth gets illuminated by the abundant light and opens his eyes to the truth of the world as Adam Kadmon. In Kabbalah, Adam Kadmon represents the ideal figure of the human, created by God himself, the first creation representing the utmost perfection, a life form spawned from the divine light to get as close to the unknown as possible. In more of a philosophical depiction, Adam Kadmon can also be described as the complete enlightenment of Adam, reaching to the highest Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, to complete his journey, which could either be Da'at, the knowable infinity, or Keter, the unknowable eternity. Different conversations depict that road in varied ways, while the core Christianity and Islam paint the idea of getting close to God as blasphemy. Some comments in Kabbalah imagines that as the utmost form of worship. Trying to understand and bask in the brilliance of the divine light can nothing be short of a lifelong prayer. As we've seen from our thieves, the second form of their personas was a mythological trickster. And for Maruki it is no different. Azathoth changes into Adam Kadmon, but unlike the complete change in our trickster's personas, Azathoth grows its tendrils to form inside a golden shell. By name and design it is Adam Kadmon, but because of the circumstances of his creation, the entire structure of it is still Azathoth, a mythological trickster to take on the attributes of Adam Kadmon. The Lovecraftian mythos were used to exemplify the artificial, man-made nature of Maruki's vision. Now when that fails, his will grabs a proper mythological figure to protect their vision, eschewing his methodical process to create an answer. Another important point is the change in Maruki's battle lines. Rather than Maruki taking the lead as a shepherd, he corrects himself to mention both himself and Adam Kadmon. He stops using his limitation powers and straight up switches to Adam's devastating attacks. His partially broken mask also suggests a crack in his idea of rebellion, foregoing the pursuit of change to realize his will at any cost. Contrary to most JRPG bosses, Maruki's first phase is much harder and requires apt strategies. Adam Kadmon, with his towering height, also reveals the undistorted cityscape around them. Maruki, with his imagining of the biblical tree, created a straight line into the heavens. But once you are high enough, everything around you is still humane and constructed. This is a fitting parallel for the Adam Kadmon segment, as Azathoth was still at the core of his world during the previous fight. The reason for the gigantic scales is also explained by Morgana in the Thieves' Den. Maruki's control over his palace affected the sizes of both his personas. When that form also fails, Maruki blames himself for not being true to his promise. He sees Adam Kadmon as himself, more so the entirety of his goals. Azathoth unlike many other personas, had a hand in the road Maruki pursued, but it is not exactly clear whether they genuinely had a dialogue between them, or was it all Maruki's inner thoughts. A persona may be a voice for one's image, one's word in his mind, but Maruki completely gives into the fantasy, discarding his ego to rise above the thieves. In the third battle, Maruki removes himself from the conversation, quite like in his previous experiments, and Adam Kadmon takes over, changing the interaction between the material person and the metaphysical persona. Then Adam Kadmon says, light is the source and destination. That is not only the main idea of Kabbalah, but also a complete lie in the case of Maruki. Kabbalah says the divine light gave birth to the entire creation, which is called the infinite light. But the creation only reflected that holy light in a manner to be understood. God's creation of the tree of life also caused its sephira to blossom, creating an order of descending planes. The highest plane is closer to God's crown, and the lowest plane exists as the material reality. One might decipher that as a clear difference between the light above and the light below, the enlightened and the baneful. But Kabbalah denies that on every occasion. At every point of creation, every segment of the tree reflects the very same light and arrives at the very same point. Although what you understand at the moment may differ in time, you are never contained far than the light of knowledge. At every point, everyone basks in the same light, but the message, the meaning, and the reflection may differ for everyone. Enlightenment is a journey given to everyone, and Adam Kadmon is an image of God's first light, not necessarily a certain end etap. Maruki's Adam Kadmon is a twisted transfiguration of Azathoth, took its knowledge in the form of the forbidden apple, assimilates its material counterpart into a subconscious thought, and insists on his vision of enlightenment, blind to the truth of the one light and its many forms. Everything went as necessary to create a pseudo-artificial Adam Kadmon, coincidentally, but Maruki's reality is denied by those with the will. As the palace crumbles around them, the residue of mementos disappears from reality as well. The way to another universe created by a single human is closed, and the path of Adam's labor returned to make everything as it is. Losing his newfound voice, Maruki clings to his sadness and fury. What began as a gentle discussion between differing ideals turns into a fistfight between two humans with a resolute winner. Neither party has any intention to harm the other, but both of them need to vent out the hardships they endured and will endure. That's why I insisted on explaining the prospect of a change of heart, freed from the god of control. Mankind can grow stagnant in their desires, but a different shade of light can still cause them to look at a different sky.
Let's begin. I gave up everything! So why? Why, Rumi? A reality where no one suffers.
Before the ending, Persona 5 Royal shows the party's group in the most mundane way. Just like in the original, Joker completes his fool's journey to attain the world, crafted of his strife and bonds. Lavenza mentions their wish to see humanity improve and prosper, which would be lost in Maruki's happiness-bound world. Everyone's cognition differs, everyone's paradise differs, and what you wish to find at the end of your journey is nothing short of a paradise. Likewise, the rest of the thieves spend this moment deciding on their new goals, graduating from the Phantom Thieves to pursue their education and interests. Ryuji decides to follow a new scholarship to return to running and help his mother. Anne will study abroad to gain new chances for her modeling career. Yusuke stays in Shibuya to create a painting worthy of the city's memories. Futaba finds the courage to attend high school with her childhood friend. Makoto and Haru moves in together to continue college, both still aiming to shoulder their father's legacies. That is the true growth that accepts the change and goes forward with a reality of their own. Now, where does this leave Sumire and Akechi? Royal's ending spreads itself thin over the many characters. The original thieves take the backseat, and Maruki arrives at Joker's rescue as a taxi driver. Maruki detached himself from his obsessive research into cognitive science to make a bet on a new perspective. Just as his persona said, that is still his path, as everything before it was. He can carry on as a taxi driver his whole life, or return to pursue an academic career. That is the beauty of the journey we so love to tell stories about. Sumire will follow her sister's path as she is now, looking beyond self-deprecation to adapt her style. Although she shows up at the train station for goodbyes, that scene is weirdly detached, almost like a last-minute decision? Maybe. As for Akechi, he should be dead with Maruki's reality crumbling, but a very similar figure could be seen through Joker's window. Sadly, there are many unused Akechi cutscenes in the game, showing him returning to a rehab center that harbored him and his mother for a while. In that cutscene, he is obviously revealed to be alive, but also decides to turn himself in one more time to help with the thieves' attempts to rescue their leader. That would explain and improve so much if they intended to show him alive in the first place. With the ending as it is, Akechi seems to be taken into custody at the very same train station, which lessens much of the built-up relationships in the third semester. Of course, you never know when a spin-off or sequel would come out of a Persona game, so everything has to be open-ended in the end. That is my first criticism in that video. I'm impressed with myself. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I've done my best to make justice to all the references and messages in Royal and Kabbalah in general, of course. Like in the beginning, this game is very special to me, and the interpretations I came up with influenced me both in my writing and as a person. Hopefully, you'd like the fruit of my really long research. With that out of the way, I won't be talking about Persona for a while, and will focus on a few shorter videos. You know, to not be the Persona channel, I swear I like other games as well. So look forward to those, and I'll see you guys next time.